लक्ष्मीनाथ समारंभां नादयामुन मध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्य पर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् यो नित्यमच्युतपदाम्बुज युग्मरुक्म व्यामोहदस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोऽस्य दयैकसिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणं प्रपद्ये. A villager came running up to a holy man who was resting under a tree. The stone, please give me the precious stone, the villager exclaimed. The holy man calmly asked him, what stone? Last night I dreamt that I would find a holy man who would give me a precious stone that would make me rich forever, replied the villager. The holy man searched through his bag and pulled out a stone. He probably meant this one, he said, as he handed it to the villager. I found it on a forest path a few days ago. You can certainly have it. The villager looked at the stone in wonder. It was a diamond, probably the largest diamond in the whole world. He took it and walked away. All night, the villager tossed about in bed, unable to sleep. Next day, at the crack of dawn, he woke the holy man and said, Sir, give me the wealth that makes it possible for you to give this diamond away so easily. As we have seen so far, the principle of renunciation, renouncing all attachments, is central to Karma Yoga. Pranams to the Lord, pranams to all the Acharyas. Dear Mahatmas, the topics for today's session are Karma Sanyasa Yoga and Dhyana Yoga, chapters 5 and 6 of the Gita. The chapters highlight the principle of renunciation in our actions and the practice of meditation, both for achieving the goal of Atma Sakshatkara, self-realization. The 5th chapter of the Gita develops the case for Karma Yoga by pointing to its quicker efficacy in the matter of leading to self-realization. This chapter further elaborates the element of detachment in action, consisting of the firm conviction that the self is not the actual executive force bringing about any action. Sri Krishna also determines in this chapter in very clear terms the exact nature of the knowledge that emerges out of the practice of Karma Yoga. The nature of the individual soul, the Atman, in relation to action, and the chief features of Karma Yoga are also reaffirmed in appropriate places to round off the theme of Karma Yoga into a completed whole. The 5th chapter opens with a question by Arjuna. He asks, Hey Krishna, you praise the contemplative life, and again you praise the yoga of action. Between the two, please do tell me conclusively which is better. In the 2nd chapter, Karma Yoga was recommended as the first imperative for the spiritual aspirant, and one was enjoined to work for the intuitive vision of the self through Jnana Yoga after acquiring the necessary purity of mind through that first step. In other words, Jnana Yoga was placed on a higher level as something that rises out of the fullness of Karma Yoga. But in the 3rd and 4th chapters, it was pointed out that Karma Yoga is to be preferred even by one who is fit and qualified for the practice of Jnana Yoga. Karma Yoga was also praised as a self-sufficient means for the realization of the Atman, not necessarily requiring the mediation of Jnana Yoga. Arjuna now asks for a decisive statement as to which of these two equally praiseworthy methods is better in bringing about speedier realization of the goal and is also easier to practice. Sanyasa karmayogascha nishreyasakara ubhau tayostu karma sanyasat karmayogo vishishyate. Renunciation of deeds, that is Jnana Yoga, and Karma Yoga both lead to the spiritual goal of self-realization. But of these two, Karma Yoga is superior, declares Krishna. That Karma Yogi, who being content with the experience of the self involved in Karma Yoga, does not want anything else and therefore hates nothing and bears with equanimity the dualities of life, must be construed as being established in perpetual knowledge, perpetual jnana. When established in jnana, that is, when he is constantly guided by the knowledge of the true nature of the Atman, the individual soul, he easily raises above the dualities of life, joys and sorrows, successes and failures. There was a wise man, a practitioner of Karma Yoga, who lived his life leading by example. Seeing him always happy, always contented, a young man approached him seeking help. This youngster had countless problems in life, and he explained to the wise man one of his current problems tormenting him. "I cannot help you get rid of this problem," remarked the wise man. The youngster had high hopes of getting some guidance, getting some solution, some sort of wisdom that can address his problem, and therefore was disappointed. After a few weeks, the youngster again approached the wise man. This time he had another problem that pestered him, gave him sleepless nights. He was hoping that this time the wise man could possibly help him with this new problem. "I cannot help you get rid of this problem," remarked the wise man again. The youngster started now to get impatient. "Everyone says that you live an enlightened life, and why can't you help me get rid of any of my problems?" he exclaimed. "In the last 1 year, how many problems did you have?" questioned the wise man. Taking his time, the youngster responded, "Almost 50. Then in a calm and composed voice, the wise man spoke. "My dear young man, you will always have problems in life. One will go and another will arrive. I cannot help you get rid of your 50 problems. However, I can help you with your 51st problem." The baffled youngster asked, "But what is my 51st problem?" The wise man replied, "Your 51st problem is that you want to get rid of your 50 problems." Having taken birth, having taken a physical embodiment primarily to exhaust our karmas, the individual has to necessarily recognize that in a world of dualities, problems are unavoidable. What surprises you most about humankind? God was asked this profound question. God answered, that they get bored with childhood, they rush to grow up, and then long to be children again. That they lose their health to make money, and then lose their money to restore their health. That by constantly analyzing the past and thinking anxiously about the future, they forget the present such that they live in neither the present nor the future. When the Karma Yogi is content experiencing his own self, when the reference of any of his actions is the self and not the ego, he lives a happy, enlightened life. When one is always influenced by objects outside the self, which include people, situations, and circumstances, one is constantly feeling an intense need for external power, need to control things, need for approval. The ego becomes the reference point for all actions. Power based on the ego is false power. It only lasts as long as the external object of reference is there. If one has a certain title or lots of money, the power one enjoys goes with that title, goes with that money. Ego-based power will only last as long as those things last. As soon as the title goes away, as soon as the money goes away, so does the power. When the reference of actions is the Atman, the self, one experiences true being. One experiences one's true being, which is unfearful of any challenges, has respect for all people, and feels beneath no one. Self-power, therefore, is true power. A karma yogi enjoys such a true power. Krishna says that it is the unenlightened who imagine that the two ways differ in their goals. Karma yoga leading only to Jnana yoga, while Jnana yoga is the single means for attaining the vision of the self. This is not the case. As the goal is the same, Atma Sakshatkara, self-realization, the wise recognize the two ways as two equal alternatives. But the point of difference between the two lies in the fact that Jnana Yoga is impossible of achievement without Karma Yoga, whereas practice of Karma Yoga can lead one to the goal of self-realization without the mediation of Jnana Yoga. The man on the path of action, being engaged in contributory selfless work aligned to a higher cause, acquires purity of mind, as he does not turn away from the activity to which he has been all along accustomed, but only redirects and sublimates his activity. Control of the mind becomes easy for him. Sense control also becomes easy for him in consequence. The karma yogi performs actions through the body, mind, and the determining intellect, abandoning desire for fruits for purposes of attaining purity, for destroying the binding effects of the past deeds. Kayena manasa buddhya kevalairindrayairapi yoginah karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma suddhaye. Krishna states that the one free from lingering fondness for external objects and wholly devoted to self-realization performs actions for the purification of the mind, renouncing desire for all fruits of actions, attains the joy of the steady experience of the self. Yoginah karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma suddhaye. Now Krishna declares, Yuktah karma palam tyaktva shantim apnoti naishtikim ayuktah kamakarena phale sakto nibadhyate. Yuktah karma palam tyaktva shantim apnoti naishtikim ayuktah kamakarena phale sakto nibadhyate. A karma yogi who has abandoned the attachment to the fruits attains the everlasting peace, attains the blissful experience of the Jivatman. But the unsteady person who is attached to the fruits of action, being impelled by desires, is bound to samsara. Tad buddhyas tadatmanas tannishtas tatparayanaha gachanti apunaravrittim jnana nirdhuta kalmashaha. Tadbudhyas tadatmanas tannishtas tatparayanaha. Gachanti apunaravrittim jnana nirdhuta kalmashaha. Those who are determined to have the vision of the self, their mind being directed towards the self, they should focus on the self as their goal and be deeply absorbed in the meditation on the self. Such persons are able to remove the impurities of the mind persisting from the past lives. They would then be able to reach the state of Atma Sakshatkara, from which there is no return to the mundane existence. And now Krishna describes the characteristics of the yogis who have known the true nature of the Jivatman. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Shunichaiva Shwapakecha Panditaha Samadarshinaha. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Shunichaiva Shwapakecha Panditaha Samadarshinaha. The men of wisdom look upon with equanimity a Brahmana endowed with learning and humility, a cow, an elephant, and even a dog, as well as an eater of dog's meat. Samatva Darshana signifies that a wise man who has known the true nature of the self sees that the individual souls of all living beings, though they are dissimilar in respect of their bodies, their embodiments, are same in respect of their intrinsic nature in jnana and ananda. The dissimilarity observed in respect of the individuals are due to the variation of the physical bodies assumed by the souls in accordance with their karma. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Shunichaiva Shwapakecha Panditaha Samadarshinaha. The description of Karma Yoga is concluded in this chapter with an indication of what it leads to, namely yoga, understood as the intuitive knowledge of the self. This topic of yoga is dealt with in detail in the next chapter, Dhyana Yoga, chapter 6 of the Gita. Let me now move on to chapter 6 with an interesting story. Once there was a woodcutter who used to cut wood from forest and sell it in the market to earn his living. Every day on his way to work, he used to come across a sage meditating in the forest. The radiant, serene demeanor of the sage kindled some curiosity in the woodcutter. One day, he decided to talk to the sage and approached him. As he went closer, the sage just remarked, "Go deeper." And then the sage closed his eyes in meditation. That day, the woodcutter went deep inside the forest, and to his surprise, he found big sandalwood trees. This changed the fortunes of the woodcutter. He started doing sandalwood business and made lots of money. After many days, he remembered the sage's remark, "Go deeper." He felt the urge of going deeper into the forest, and to his amazement, he found a silver mine just ahead of the place where he had stopped last time. He was elated, and after celebrating his growing fortune, he visited the sage to thank him. The sage looked at him and repeated, "Go deeper," and went back to his meditation. The woodcutter was now convinced that he was about to discover immense treasure. Counting his blessings, he went much deeper into the forest and found out a gold mountain, like the one in the movie, the famous classic Magnus Gold. Some years passed by. The woodcutter was now the richest man in the country. He had no time for the sage. However, one day he remembered the sage and went to the forest. Seeing him approaching, the sage again remarked, "Go deeper." The rich man, that is the ex-woodcutter, was intrigued. What else could be there to discover? He went very deep, very, very deep inside the forest. The path was not easy and the journey was perilous. But he was determined. Nothing could stop him. At last, he came across an incredible sight. Beyond his imagination, he saw a hill of diamonds. This experience was too much for him. It shook his very foundation. He paused. He paused and reflected on the happenings of the past few years. His rags to riches story. Go deeper. Go deeper. The soothing words of the sage reverberated in his ears. More importantly, the serene, glowing face of the sage flashed in front of him. The sage knew about the sandalwood trees, the silver mines, the gold mountain, and the hill of diamonds. And yet, he did not go after them. There must be something more valuable with the sage, thought the woodcutter. And immediately he rushed towards the sage. He found the sage and fell at his feet. The sage took him up by his arms and said, "All the while I was waiting for you. Now go deeper, deep inside your heart. You will come across more beautiful, more valuable experiences. But don't stop. Go deeper. You will find yourself and eventually your God." The fundamental purport of chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, is the inculcation of the cultivation of yoga, understood as a technique and achievement of an inward intuitive vision of the nature of the individual soul, Atma Sakshatkara, self-realization, the prerequisite for God realization, which will be covered starting from chapter 7. Psychologists have estimated that on an average we have as many as 60,000 thoughts per day. More importantly, 95 to 98% of these 60,000 thoughts we process are repeated daily. Each of these thoughts at the physical brain level is releasing a shower of chemicals. Neuroscientists estimate that the human brain contains 100 billion neurons. Each neuron has about 1,000 connections. Each connection fires on an average 200 times per second, resulting in 20,000 trillion calculations per second. And all this consumes loads of life energy. Even if we can reduce the number of thoughts by a small percentage, it can have a huge bearing on our lives. Dhyana Yoga enables us with this power of that conserved energy. The word yoga is used in several senses in the text of the Gita. The work as a whole is described by tradition as Yoga Shastra. Each chapter is named a yoga. Jnana, Karma and Bhakti are described as forms of yoga, and Sri Krishna himself is glorified as the Lord of Yoga. The yoga that is dealt with in this chapter, chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, has the specific meaning of Atmavalokana, the vision of the nature of one's own soul as transcending the body and as characterized by knowledge as its attribute. Krishna declares, Yadahi nendriyatheshu na karmasvarusajjate sarva sankalpa sanyasi yogarudhas tadochyate. Yadahi nendriyatheshu na karmasvarusajjate sarva sankalpa sanyasi yogarudhas tadochyate. When one does not get attached to the objects of senses and the activities connected with them, and consequently has abandoned all desires, then he is said to have attained the goal of yoga, yogarudha. Krishna goes on to describe the characteristics of the yogarudha, emphasizing more the control of the mind for the success of yoga, more than the renunciation of karmas, the once prescribed deeds. Krishna declares, Uddhared atmanatmanam na atmanam avasadayet. Atmaiva hyatmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratmanaha. Uddhared atmanatmanam na atmanam avasadayet. Atmaiva hyatmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratmanaha. One should attain the self by means of the mind and not let the self sink down. For the mind alone is the friend of the self, and the mind alone is the foe of the self. The self is like the still center of the wheel, where the four spokes are the four functions of the mind that operate the external wheel in the world. When we say mind, it actually represents four functions: manas, chitta, ahankara, buddhi. Manas, sensory processing mind. Chitta is the storage of impressions. Ahankara, the ego. Buddhi, the one which decides, which judges, which discriminates. The four functions of the mind are like the four spokes that drive the wheel to operate in the external road of life. The wheel engages the world while the center remains still. While the wheel turns, the center hub remains still. The center is a consciousness, the self, which remains still. Observing and discriminating between the four functions of the mind is a key to self-realization. Manas is the lower mind through which the mind interacts with the external world and takes in sensory impressions and data. Manas is the direct supervisor of the senses in the factory of life. It does a wonderful job of carrying out directions, but it is not supposed to be the key decision maker in the factory of life. That is the job of buddhi. If buddhi is clouded, then manas has a habit of continuing to question, seeking good instruction. Then it often listens to whoever is speaking the loudest in the factory, which is the wants, the wishes, the desires, the attractions and aversions stored in the memory bank of the chitta. Chitta is the memory bank of our karma vasanas. It stores impressions and experiences. Every selfish act leaves behind its vasana, latent impression in the mind. Therefore, the accumulation of those impressions continue as long as actions are done with attachment to the results. Chitta is the storage place of the countless latent impressions, the countless vasanas. If chitta is not coordinated with the other functions of mind, then the thousands of impressions in this bed of the lake of mind start to stir and arise. It is as if these many latent impressions coming to life are all competing for the attention of manas to carry out their wants in the external world. In the absence of clear buddhi, the competing voices of chitta often drive manas to take actions in the world that are not really so very useful. A good way to cultivate the witnessing of chitta is to simply be aware of the stream of thoughts, emotions, images and impressions that arise in front of manas. The third function of the mind is ahankara, the I-ness, the ego. Ahankara takes on partners. This wave of I-ness called ahankara that aligns itself or forms partnership with the data or impressions in the chitta, and in turn with manas, which then responds to the desires being sought by this individuality. Meanwhile, buddhi, the deep aspect which knows, decides and discriminates, remain clouded. Thus it is said that purifying buddhi or unclouding buddhi is the most important task in the path of self-realization. The fourth function of the mind, buddhi, is the higher aspect of mind, the doorway to inner wisdom. The word buddhi itself comes from the root buddh, which means one who has awakened. Buddhi has a capacity to decide, judge, and make cognitive discriminations and differentiations. It can determine the wiser of two courses of action if it functions clearly and if manas will accept its guidance. Buddhi is to be cultivated as the decision maker in the factory of life. Otherwise, manas gets his instructions from the habit patterns stored in the chitta that are colored by the hankara, the ego. Often, buddhi is clouded over by all of the coloring and impressions in the chitta. Thus, a major task of sadhana, any spiritual practice, is to uncloud the clouded buddhi, purify it, purify the mind. Then, with clear choice, one can ever improve the choices that lead to the fruits of all spiritual practices. To discriminate between buddhi and pure consciousness, the self, is one of the final stages in the meditative journey. An unclouded buddhi is the gateway to the self, to the Atman. It is through the mind, a fully controlled mind, that we can attain the self that is beyond the mind. Uddhared atmanatmanam na atmanam avasadayet. Atmaiva hyatmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratmanaha. Therefore, Krishna declares, for him whose mind is conquered and who is serene, unaffected by heat and cold, pleasure and pain, honor and dishonor, his self is well set for experiencing clear vision. Lord Krishna therefore tells Arjuna that the yogi should practice Jnana Yoga and goes on to explain various requirements to be fulfilled for its observance. Then in 4 verses, verse 29 to verse 32, the culminating vision achieved through yoga is expounded. The 4 verses speak of the ideal yogi who has started to see the oneness of reality, samadarshana. Each verse relates to a particular stage of achievement, and the 4 stages are described in an ascending order. In the first stage, the yogi perceives inwardly his own self and other individual selves as transcending matter and as characterized by the same essential attribute of knowledge. He is a man of equal vision. In the second stage, he grows into the realization that the pure self is holy like God himself. The likeness to divine holiness becomes a matter of direct experience to him. His self-awareness brings to him naturally the awareness of God, for his own self and the Lord are linked, as it were, in the common character of holiness. The 2 stages described so far belong to the experience of ecstatic self-vision. In the first, the perspective of equality among all selves is achieved. In the second, the further discovery of likeness to God is made, and guided by that, the seer perceives God in all selves and all selves in God. Now the third stage draws attention to the condition of one who returns from the summit of ecstatic vision to the normal plane of consciousness. That is, even while being engaged in worldly activities, his mind remains fixed on God. In the 4th stage, the yogi, being perfectly established in the equality of all selves in their transcendent and pure essence, does not enter again into the delusive attachment to his own body and the body-centered associations. Here, he stands above all pleasures and afflictions that would have affected him if he were still attached to them. Samadarshana implies that the jivas are essentially of the same nature, constituted of knowledge, jnana swarupa, after they are disassociated with the physical body. When the yogi reaches higher stages of jnana yoga, he visualizes that his jivatma is constituted of jnana in respect of his intrinsic nature, and on the basis of this realization, he also comprehends that all other atmans abiding in other beings are also of the same nature. Also, as the yogi further advances in the practice of yoga, he realizes that the Paramatman abides in all beings and that all selves abide in the Paramatman. Here, the samatva implies and signifies that there is some similarity between the Jivatma and Brahman, the Paramatma, in respect of certain characteristics such as Jnana, Ananda and Amalatva. As explicitly stated in the Mundakopanishad, the Jivatma, when it is liberated from bondage, attains Samya, similarity with Brahman in the state of Moksha. Paramam Samyam Upaiti, declares the Upanishad. Paramam Samyam Upaiti. After stating the characteristics of the yogis who have perfected the practice of yoga, Lord Krishna mentions the difficulty of controlling the mind, and that it can be effected only by means of abhyasa or repeated practice and vairagya, that is non-attachment. There was a very poor man who served the sage diligently, and in return the sage gifted him a beautiful lamp. As he gave the lamp, the sage explained, "In the lamp lives a genie who can fulfill all your desires. But beware, the genie is always active and rather impatient. If you don't pay attention to him, he will start taking things away from you." The poor man, overjoyed with his new acquisition, moved on, and on reaching home, he rubbed the lamp. The genie appeared and asked, "How can I serve you, master?" "Prepare me a meal worthy of a king," commanded the poor man. Within a second, a sumptuous 100 courses meal was ready. The poor man was delighted. However, as he was about to enjoy the meal, the hyperactive genie asked again, "And how can I serve you, master?" Keeping in mind that if the genie was unoccupied, he would take away the goodies, the poor man had no option but to give the genie some more work. Therefore he commanded, "Build me a beautiful castle suitable for an emperor." Only a few seconds passed by, and before the poor man could even taste a few items of the tempting spread of the sumptuous meal, he found himself in a massive palace with breathtaking interiors. He liked to explore the palace, but the genie was once again jobless and raring to go. "How can I serve you now, master?" the genie asked. Every wish of the poor man was fulfilled by the genie almost instantaneously. But the poor man was in a wretched, pathetic state of being unable to enjoy anything. It turned out that his only occupation was to keep the genie preoccupied. He could neither give up all the things that the genie miraculously produced on his command, nor enjoy any of them. Frustrated and annoyed, he turned to the wise sage for help. The sage gave him an instruction, and then the poor man commanded the genie, "Build me a long pole and stick it to the ground." As the genie produced the pole in an instant, the poor man continued, "Now keep climbing up and down the pole, over and over again." Now, with the genie totally preoccupied, climbing up and down the pole, the man finally had his time to enjoy the meal, explore the palace, and do other things. Our minds are like the genie in the story, restless, busy, always wanting to satisfy every desire. If the mind is not controlled, then it takes control. The restless mind has to be brought under control by bringing it to focus and contemplate eventually on the self. The restless mind has to be brought under control by bringing it to focus and contemplate eventually on the self. Sri Krishna suggests two methods for bringing the mind under control and make it accomplish the difficult task on hand. They are Abhyasa and Vairagya, repeated practice and non-attachment or renunciation of attachment. Krishna then goes on and puts in a nutshell the greatness of Jnana Yoga. It is greater than mere knowledge devoid of the understanding of the Atman. And it is greater than mere karma not containing the element of jnana, element of self-knowledge. Finally, Krishna concludes chapter 6 and the first hexad of the Gita. Yoginam api sarvesham madgatena antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam sameyukta tamomataha. He who meditates on me with loving devotion, bhajate, loving devotion, and with faith, whose mind is absorbed in me, I consider him the greatest of all the yogis and of all others. This last verse effects a tremendous forward leap from the yoga of self-realization. While the yoga laid down so far is the means for the realization and immediate apprehension of the intrinsic being and nature of the Atman, the new yoga introduced here in this last verse is the pathway to the realization of Paramatman or Brahman. While devotion to God was brought in off and on in the course of the first group of 6 chapters in dealing with Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga, it only occupied a subordinate position so far, the principal direction of effort being towards self-realization. The chapter concludes by effecting a transition to the theme of the second group of 6 chapters, 7 to 12, which are wholly focused on God realization, knowing the Paramatma, and the means to attain him, Bhakti Yoga. Let me do a quick recap quoting the shlokas of Swami Alavandar from his Gita-artha Sangraha. Asaktya lokarakshaye guneshwaropya kartrutam sarveshwareva nyasyokta tritiye karma karyatha. Asaktya lokarakshaye guneshwaropya kartrutam sarveshwareva nyasyokta tritiye karma karyatha. The third chapter explains the imperative necessity for the performance of one's duty, contributory and selfless in nature, ascribing actions to the gunas of Prakriti, one's material nature, and constantly aligned with a higher cause and a firm belief of dependence on the Lord for all our actions. For the protection of the world, for the sake of setting the right example to be emulated, this Karma Yoga, that is the contributory selfless duty aligned to God, must be practiced. This is the summary of chapter 3. Prasangati swasvabhavoktihi karmano karmatasya cha vedhagnanasya mahatmyam chaturdhyaya uchyate. In the 4th chapter, in the course of his exposition of Karma Yoga, Sri Krishna shares the secret of his divine incarnations, the reality of his avatars and their purpose, the distinctive nature of Karma Yoga, its various types, the primacy of the element of Jnana, knowledge, in Karma Yoga are all well explained in 4th chapter. Prasangati swasvabhavoktihi karmano karmatasya cha medhagnanasya mahatmyam chaturdhyaya uchyate. Summary of chapter 4. Karma yogasya saukaryam shaighriyam kaschana tadvidaha brahmajnana prakarascha panchamadhyaya uchyate. The 5th chapter explains the quicker and easier efficacy of Karma Yoga. It explains the nature of the self in relation to action and the nature of knowledge emerging out of the practice of Karma Yoga. Karma yogasya saukaryam shaighriyam kaschana tadvidaha brahmajnana prakarascha panchamadhyaya uchyate. Summary of chapter 5. Yogabhyasa vidiryogi chaturtha yoga sadhanam. Yoga siddhi swayogasya paramyam shashta uchyate. Yogabhyasa vidiryogi chaturtha yoga sadhanam. Yoga siddhi swayogasya paramyam shashta uchyate. This is the summary of 6th chapter, Dhyana Yoga. The fundamental purport of 6th chapter is the inculcation of the cultivation of yoga, understood as a technique and achievement of an inward vision of the nature of the Jivatman, the individual soul. Now let us conclude by summarizing the first group of 6 chapters, chapter 1 to chapter 6. ज्ञानकर्मात्मिके निष्ठे योगलक्ष्ये सुसंस्कृते आत्मानुभूति सिद्ध्यर्थे पूर्वषट्केन चोदिते. Swami Alavandar declares in the first hexad of the Gita, chapters 1 to 6, the steady application of the means of Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga is prescribed for achieving the goal of self-realization, Atma Sakshatkara, which is a prerequisite to Paramatma Sakshatkara, God realization. With this, I conclude today's session. Sriranga Mangalanidhim Karunanivasam Sri Venkatadri Shikarale Kalameham Sri Hastisela Shikarojjvala Parijatam Sri Sannamami Sirasa Yadushaila Deepam. Om Tat Sat Sarvam Sri Krishnar Padamastu.